My all dear friends and all my dear viewers, I welcome you all in this video tutorial. Friends, in this video tutorial, we are going to learn a new poem. One of the poem which is prescribed by Shivaji University Kolhapur for the students of BA Part 3rd who are studying in the senior colleges of BA Part 3rd affiliated to Shivaji University Kolhapur. Friends, actually you know that you might have seen already I have prepared video tutorials on syllabus, model of question paper. So in this tutorial now we are going to learn one of the new poem by one of the Indian famous poet. Actually the poet is Anglo-Indian poet, but he regarded himself as Indian, though he is a poet of Portuguese origin. So the title of the poem is The Orphan Girl. The Orphan Girl by Henry Louis Vivian Derozio. Henry Derozio. So friends, just before going towards the poem, I will try to throw light upon a little bit light. Just we will have a look on the biographical sketch of this poet. So when we look at the biographical note of the poet Henry Louis Vivian Derozio. So this poem is a unique poem. The title of the poem is The Orphan Girl. He was an Indian poet of Portuguese origin. Though he multilingual person, but he considered himself more as Indian. So friends, in this poem we are going to study there is one orphan girl. That girl lost her father and mother. So in this poem there are different themes that we are going to study. Different literary devices have been employed by the poet. So Henry Derozio, he was a radical thinker. He was a radical thinker in Bengal, in Kolkata. He was a teacher as well as headmaster. He was a headmaster in Hindu College, Kolkata. Friends, let me tell you one more thing about this poet, that this poet's ideas or his ideology influenced the Bengal Renaissance in the early 19th century. So it is a very remarkable thing. It is very remarkable thing in terms of his literary contribution and other literary works in different fields. So friend, he used to speak Bengali, Hindi, then Portuguese and English, but he considered himself as Indian more. So the present poem, before going towards the poem, here I would like to mention one more thing about the poet Derozio. He was the first modern Indian English poet. Keep in mind, he was the first modern Indian poet from Bengal. So again, he was born on 18th of April 1809, and he died. Unfortunately, he died in the year of 1831. So friends, let me tell you one more thing about the poet, that he was the radical thinker of his time. And this poem he has composed about a young girl whose father died in the war, and after the death of her father, her mother, who lost her life, she also died because of the sorrow of her husband, and she died of an attack. So it is a very unique poem. It is a very unique poem in the sense that when we see the structure of the poem, so this poem's structure is categorized into two parts. the poem is composed into two parts. The first part contains 12 lines and the second part contains 12 lines. So when we look at the structural pattern, so we find, except first 4 lines, remaining every 2 lines have rhyming scheme. And the rhyming scheme that we find, A B in the first part, and later it switches to B B C C. So again, I would like to mention one more thing about the poem is that it has different themes. It has different themes such as bad effects of the war. Then the next theme, friendless world and deaths. Then how this cruel world, the brutality of the cruel world is shown in the poem, because that little girl's father died in the war, and how the world tries to look at that little girl. Nobody tries to give her shelter, and everybody looks at her as very cunningly. So actually cruelty of the world is mentioned in the poem, how the people in the world looks at the courageous people in the world. So here circumstances that a woman faces, how a woman without her husband or her male counterpart she lives, and what kind of life she faces in the society is also described. And one more thing that is there in the poem that we will see, that is description of a young girl and her parents in the first part, and in the second part we find how the brutal world behaves with the little girl. Again, in the next part we will also see that some of the literary devices have been utilized by the poet in the poem. So these literary devices are, we will find simile, metaphor, personification, and one more alliteration. So such kinds of literary devices, so called we will see figures of speech have been employed by the poet in the poem. So it is actually a very interesting poem that we will see how this brutality or the cruel world looks at the future of that an orphan girl that we have to see in the poem. So in terms of structure, thematic patterns, literary devices, and themes, we will see in this video tutorial. So friends, I want you to go through the syllabus of 5th semester of BA part 3rd of undergraduate colleges which are affiliated to Shivaji University, Kolhapur, and then this is how I will make on each topic. I'm going to make videos that will be helpful for the students who are going to face their 5th semester, forthcoming semester. So we will see. My dear students, friends, and all my dear viewers, once again I welcome you all in this video tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to study one of the poem composed by Henry Louis Vivian Derazio. Henry Louis Vivian Derazio. And I, Mr. Vihar, going to analyze the poem The Orphan Girl. Before going towards the poem, we will just have a short biographical sketch of Henry Derazio. So let us see. So friends, this one is a biographical note, short biographical note of the poet. Henry Louis Vivian Derazio was born on 18th of April 1809 in Kolkata. His parents, he was of mixed race. His father was a Frisian Indo-Portuguese office worker, and Sophia, his mother, Sophia Johnson. She was an English woman. He was an Indian poet of Portuguese origin and assistant headmaster of Hindu College, Kolkata. So he was a teacher. He was a radical thinker of his time, and he was one of the first Indian educators to disseminate Western learning and science among the young men of Bengal. So friends, he was a teacher in English literature and history at the New Hindu College, Kolkata. He organized debates where ideas and social norms were freely debated. So at the age of 17, he was appointed as a teacher of English literature and history. At the age of 18, he became a professor of English literature and history at the Hindu College, Kolkata. Then in 1828, he motivated his students to form a literary and debating club called the Academic Association. Now let us see the poem. The Orphan Girl. His poems have a patriotic zeal. The poem The Orphan Girl. Here in this poem, he speaks of a young girl's father has died in the war, while her mother died lamenting her husband's death, and the girl is left alone. She is left orphan. So in this cruel world, the girl is left orphan, having no one to take care of. So the poem is divided into two main parts, each having 12 and 14 lines respectively. Every two verses rhyme with each other except the first four verses. So here, let us see the first stanza of the poem. Stanza first. In this tutorial, so this stanza I'm going to analyze first. As you know, D'Orazio is a well-known and predominant 19th century poet. So in this poem, he speaks of young girl's father has died in the war, while her mother died in the sorrow of her husband's death. So in the cruel world, the girl is left orphan, having no one to take care of. So let us see the poem. Her hair was black as a raven's wings. See now, her hair, her means this pronoun is used for the orphan girl. Her hair was black as a raven's wings. So ravens means a large black bird with a straight bill. So the girl's hair was black as a raven's wings. So ravens means a black bird, large black bird with a straight bill. So her hair was like that raven's wings. So here we find, see, her hair and the raven's wings. Here similarity is shown by the poet, and here we find in the first line or in the first verse of the poem, her hair was black as a raven's wings, means similarity is shown, and so this figure of speech is simile. So actually this is the literary device. Many devices have been utilized by the poet. The next line, her cheek the tulip's hue did wear. Now her cheek the tulips, tulips flower. Hue means become colored, did wear. So here also we will find the device, literary device. Her voice was soft as when night winds sing. So here we will find, her cheek is referred as a metaphor, tulips, because her cheek referred with tulips hue. Hue means become color, tulips colored, did wear. So this is so the metaphor. Her voice was soft as when night winds sing. So again here we'll find her voice was soft as when night winds sing. So her voice is compared as similar with night winds sing. So here also we will find similarity is tried to show, so the literary device is simile. Her brow was as a moonbeam fair. So in terms of her brow, so the first stanza we find the first part in the first stanza, the poet is going to describe the orphan girl. So her voice, as we have seen. Now her brow was as a moonbeam. So moonbeam means a ray of moonlight. A ray of moonlight. So here also we will find her brow is going to be compared with the moonbeam fair. So here also we will find in this line also there is simile, because similarity is shown between her brow with moonbeam. So friends, literary devices are actually figures of speeches that are used by the poets in a poem in order to get the proper effect of their thoughts. So her sire had joined the wake of war. See the next line, her sire had joined the wake of war. So here we will find wings, sing, wear, fair, again war and scar, then grave and brave. These are rhyming pattern or rhyming words. So rhyme is one of the literary device in order to used by the poet in order to getting the proper rhythm for the poem. So here we find her sire had joined the wake of war. So her sire means father or forefather or the founder of a family. So her sire had joined the wake of war, the battle shock, the shout and scar. So here we find the battle shock, the shout and scar. So here in these two verses we will find see the repetition of the same consonantal sound. Here we'll find shout and scar, and here gained glorious grave. So the sound in the first verse S is repeated twice, and in the next line we find G, the sound G is repeated thrice in gained glorious grave. So we find in these two lines alliteration. This is one of the literary device which is used by the poet. Such is the guerdon of the brave. See the next line, such is the guerdon of the brave. So guerdon means a kind of a reward or a payment. Now while in war, that girl's father died and she is left alone. So we find here the battle shock means in the war while fighting he knew and gained the glorious grave, and he met with grave, he died. Such is the guerdon of the brave. So he was very brave and he received such kind of reward or payment by this cruel world. Her anguished mother's suffering, that little daughter that is orphan, still she is with her mother. Her anguished mother's suffering could not endure a widow's part. Now endure means to tolerate. So the death of her husband, that girl's mother's husband, means that girl's father when died in war while fighting. So her mother, that little daughter's mother, could not endure a widow's. So here actually we find her anguished mother's suffering heart could not endure a widow's part. So here we will find a very cruel. She sunk beneath her soul's distress. and left her infant parentless. So sunk means deep or decline markedly, and left her infant parentless. Parentless distress. So here we will find again rhyming words are used. So this is how we find that in the first part uh, the the poet Derozio is telling about a young girl whose father died in war and the mother died in the sorrow of her husband. So she is left orphan, and the poet is concerned about the future in the cruel world, the future of that orphan girl. The poem, we find as consists 12 lines in this first stanza. So except the first 4 lines, every 2 lines rhyme with each other. So the poem actually begins with a description of the orphan girl, and according to the poet that we find, this is the first stanza. According to the poet, her hair was black as a raven's wings. Raven means crow, a large black bird. Her cheeks were as bright as the tulip flower. So her voice was as soft as the wind or air in the night, which is quite calm and gentle. Her forehead was as bright as the rays of the moon. The beginning is thus quite pleasing, but after the fourth line, the poem turns to the dark reality. The sire, means father of that girl, went to war and fought bravely, but ultimately lost his life, and he knew that before dying. The poet sighs. This is the reward for a brave in this world. So the phrase depicts the cruelty of the world and how it rewards good and bold people. The death of her father was not borne by her mother. Rather than living as a widow, she also died of an heart attack, and the young girl was left alone in this cruel world. Now, let us see the second stanza. So here, the different literary devices, as we have seen in the first stanza, have been used. So here I just try to throw light upon what actually literary devices means, or poetic devices means. So poetic devices are a form of literary device used in poetry. A poem is created out of poetic devices composed of structural, grammatical, rhythmic, metrical, verbal, and visual elements. And they are essentially tools that a poet uses to create rhythm, enhance a poem's meaning, or intensify a mood or feeling. So here, simile, personification, metaphor, and alliteration. These are the literary devices which have been utilized by the Derozio in this orphan girl. So simile means, a simile is a figures of speech that directly compares two things. It shows similarities. Similes differ from metaphors by highlighting the similarities between two things using words such as like, as, or than. So while metaphors create an implicit comparison. So here now the second one, personification, that in the next stanza of the poem we are going to see. Personification, it attributes human characteristics to an inanimate object, animal, or abstract idea. And then metaphor. So here metaphors are used in poetry to explain and elucidate emotions, feelings, relationships, and other elements that are better described using evocative language. And the last one, that is alliteration. So alliteration, a string of 3 or 4 instances of the same consonant sound. So here, same consonant sound is repeated twice or thrice in the same verse or line of poem. So, the same consonant sound with no more than one intervening, one alliterative onset consonant sound. So alliteration is used as a mnemonic device to evoke feelings such as fear and suspense in poetry. So let us see the second stanza. She has no friend on this cold, bleak earth. So now cold and bleak earth. So it is very unpleasantly cold and very desolate or barren. To give her a shelter, a home, and a hearth. So here in the second line, to give her a shelter, there is nobody to give her a shelter. She has no friend on this desolate, bleak earth. So here we find personification is used. This device, the verse. Through life's dreary desert, alone she must wend. So, to give her a shelter, shelter means a kind of a protective covering or home, and a hearth means, fireplace. So, through life's dreary desert, alone she must wend. She must wend. Wend means, direct one's way. And dreary means, lacking liveliness. So, through life's dreary desert, alone she must wend. So here you'll find there is alliteration and metaphor which is comprised in this verse. For alas, the wretched have never a friend. So wretched means deplorable, miserable, very poor people do not get friend in the world. And should she stray from virtue's way? So stray means to move about aimlessly or to wander without any destination. So, and should she stray from virtue's way, the world will scorn, and its scorn can slay. So, the world will scorn. Scorn means, look down on or reject that orphan girl. Its scorn can slay. That scorn can kill intentionally to that girl. So, shame has enough to wring the breast with a weight of sorrow and guilt oppressed. So here, ring means squeeze, twist. So with a weight of sorrow and guilt oppressed. But oh, it is coldly cruel to wound. So the bosom whose blood must gush means praise enthusiastically unbound. No tear is so bright as the tear that flows. So again we'll find alliteration is utilized, and for erring, see this verse, for erring woman's unpitied woes. So unpitied means without pity, and woes means misery or a kind of suffering. So after the death of that girl's father, her mother is also left alone, and she uh, could not tolerate uh, to live or to accept the scorn by the society. So here actually we find that and blessed be forever his honored name who shelters an orphan from sorrow and shame. So in the second part, in the second stanza, that we find the speaker in the second part of the poem, the poet refers to the young girl's uncertainty in this world. In this cold and bleak world, he says, the world that lacks human warmth and hope. The little young orphan has no friends at all. She is friendless. She had no relatives to provide her shelter, home, and little affection. She is destined to live a desolate, dull, and depressing life. The world is compared to the desert. The poet reiterates the verses and warns the young girl to be good and kind, as the world is full of cruel people who will scorn her, mock her, and abuse her. So ultimately, the cruel world will kill her. And however, the poet laments over the fact that as a girl, the shame she will have to suffer will be sufficient to bleed her breast. She will be oppressed by the world by putting the weight of sorrows and guilt on her shoulder. To wound a woman who is already bleeding from the breast because of the sorrows and shame is very brutal. The tears of the woman coming out of sorrow and oppression are the most painful tears. And here, at the end of the poem, that we find the speaker appreciates those who shelters an orphan from sorrow and shame. According to the poet, those people are the most blessed and honorable people. Though the poet ends the poem with hope, yet he still is uncertain about the future of the young orphan girl. So this is how the second stanza. Now we will move towards the themes that are discussed in the poem. So the first theme is, there are different themes. Initially, the bad effects of the war. The poem has various themes. Initially, the poet discusses the bad effects of the war and the cruelty of the world for brave and courageous people. The poet mourns that in this world the brave are rewarded by the martyrdom. This phrase shows the brutality of the world and how it treats the courageous and brave people. And moreover, the dead leave their children alone in this cruel, friendless world, having no one to take care of them. So here we find the next theme, the cruelty. This is how which is portrayed in the poem. Then the predicament of a woman. The poet moves our attention to the circumstances that a woman faced when she is left alone in this world. The poem has a universal impact. It is not specific for a particular area and time. Even today, a lonely woman faces a lot of tortures. A woman who has no one to take care of lives a shameful life full of physical, mental, and sexual abuse and are enormously tortured by the so-called humans. So this is how predicament of a woman, the cruelty, the brutality of the world, effects of the war, and even death. This everything caused by the death. So these are the themes. These are the themes which have been utilized by the poet D'Orazio. Now we will let us see the structure of the poem here. Through the poem that the Orphan Girl, it is not a sonnet. It does has a strict structure that can be divided into two parts. The poem is actually divided into two stanzas, each stanza focusing on the specific part of the story. As we have seen in the first stanza, the poet focuses on the description of both the young girl and her parents, and as well as their deaths. So in the second stanza, the poet focuses on what will happen to the young poor little girl when both parents are dead. So he is very much concerned, very much worried about the future of that orphan girl. And then we will move towards sound. The rhyme scheme of the poem creates sound, rhythmic sound in the poem because it emphasizes through a repetition of some words. So the sound analysis of the poem not only refers to the rhyming scheme of the poem but also to the emphasis that the poet tries to create through a repetition of words such as alteration, consonants, and assonance. So the rhyming scheme of the poem The Orphan Girl is quite unique. The poem starts with a rhyming pattern of A B A B, describing the beauty of the young girl. The rhyming scheme then switches to B B C C and so on. The distinguishing first four verses of the poem emphasizes on the girl's beauty that makes the readers empathize with the poor girl. And also we find the sense. The poem, besides having a surface meaning, also has a deep meaning. Yet this poem is written simple, describing the life of an orphan girl after the death of her parents. She is desolate and the world scorns her until she is sheltered by some kind-hearted person in the world. So we find here the poet expects. So this is how this is the poem which is by the D'Orazio. So ultimately the onset of the miserable life of the girl and the miserable life of her mother. The orphan girl's appearance is also described in well manner, and the pleasant description of the girl. The poet suddenly changes the track of the poem. He now moves in the second stanza his description to a state of gloominess. He says that her father joined the war, experienced the horror of the battleground. He fought bravely in the war and became a martyr. So the poet laments the death is the reward of such a brave heart. Her mother also died as she could not endure the pain caused by her husband's tragic demise, and she left her child alone. So, coming towards the conclusion, as we have seen the plight of the orphan girl in the second stanza, because the poet is indicating people's general attitude to orphan children like her. There are many things that society could do on its part to help such children. Instead, people remain busy with ourselves and aloof from such societal issues. So here in this poem, Deradzio's humanitarianism is more suggested by his concern about the miserable condition of Hindu women. Deradzio opposed the custom of sati, which was practiced in the past. So on the abolition of sati, Deradzio severely criticizes the custom. So the troubles in the poor life of an orphan girl, we have seen the structure, thematic patterns, literary devices, and now coming towards the conclusion, the poem An Orphan Girl throws light into the condition of orphan children, especially girls, who become a subject of society's oppression and criticism. So friends, thus the poem is now over, and I hope this poem's analysis will be very helpful for you to understand Deradzio's humanitarianism or his humanitarian attitude. So we will meet in next tutorial with next topic. Till then, thank you.